burst into bloom. And every spring, people danced and sang the praises of little Gopher, who had painted the blue.
All right, thank you. Can I have the second row of lights on, please? Anthony or Rice? Okay, so we just watched.
Grammarly helps make your writing clear and concise.
Thank you. We just watched the Legend of the Paintbrush, which was a Native American story. I asked the class to think about what was the purpose of that author telling this story. In fifth grade, in your writing and reading class, you're going to be talking about author's purpose. What was the purpose of telling the story about the young boy? Okay, no hands are up. So let's talk about the young boy first. The young boy was struggling, right? He, much like yourself, please don't play with that, was a young boy with dreams. What did he dream of in the beginning part of the story? Yes. He dreamed of being a warrior. But was this young boy going to be a warrior? No. Nope. Well, that's not unlike you guys, right? Fifth graders? How many of you kind of dream about being like an awesome athlete someday? Maybe even a professional athlete, make some money at it. Hands up nice and high. Yeah, boys and girls. Okay, there's lots of us that dream of being athletes someday. And we can all be athletes in our own way. But if you want to be a professional athlete, we actually have Adam Thielen, right, from Minnesota, playing on the Minnesota Vikings, making money being an athlete. So it can happen. But does it happen for most of us?
No.
No, because your purpose might not actually be to be a star athlete. Your purpose might be something else. What was the purpose? What was this young man going to be destined to be good at? It was not being a warrior like he wanted. What was his destiny to be? Calvin? Art. It was to be painted, an artist. And at this time of the storytelling, there weren't newspapers, there wasn't email, there wasn't text messages. So how did the Native Americans share their stories?
Paintings.
Through storytelling, through talking about it, and through paintings. So this young man, his purpose was going to be a storyteller through paintings. I think the purpose of the story was probably to tell, hey, we all have a purpose. Not all of us are going to be warriors. Not all of us are going to be professional athletes, right? Some of us are going to be artists, teachers, and storytellers. Now, the reason I'm opening with this particular legend is because our first unit, after we get done with some map skills, is going to be about the earliest tribes of people that lived on North America.
Native.
And many of them, the Native Americans, right? And North America, the reason we're going to do some map skills, North America starts way up in the Arctic Circle. So people lived way up in the Arctic Circle. And you can use your imaginations because I think you've probably heard of some of these people who live way up on the Arctic Circle. They live in houses of ice. We have some nicknames, I think, that you probably are familiar with. Any guesses?
I know what it is.
They live in igloos in the wintertime. Penguins live in igloos?
Yeah.
No. Okay, well, and if you don't know the name of the people that lived in igloos, we're going to learn. In fact, somebody in this room is going to be assigned that tribe, and they're actually going to teach us that later on. This story about the young man who wanted to be a warrior, but he actually was going to be an artist, where did he live? Hank, are you answering my question? I got something else.
About the tribe.
Okay.
They're called nomads.
Nomad is another word just for somebody who moves around a lot. And sometimes, yes, the early North Americans were sometimes nomads, but not always. And we'll talk about that. Where did this young boy live? He painted on buckskin. What's buckskin? What's buckskin?
It's like leather, but it's on your skin.
Yeah. It's so deer, right? Deer hide. So he painted on deer hide. Where do you think he lived? And they had hills with plants like paintbrushes on the prairie. Yeah, he lived in the prairie. He maybe lived right next door in North Dakota. Or maybe right here in Minnesota, possibly. He lived in the plains. The Plains Indians lived all across the middle section of North America. And tribes had different reasons for living in different places. They might follow animals that provided food and support. They might live in a place if they had a certain way of making their homes. There was a group of people that lived in the cliffs near the deserts in Southwest America that lived in the cliffs. They are now referred to as cliff dwellers. So they chose to live there because of the cliffs. Sometimes they lived near the trees and woods and lived there because the trees and woods would provide things for them to eat and to make homes and to make clothing out of. All right. Now, history has been passed down orally. If you are the person who tells a story, you are called the primary source. Raise your hand if you were at the football game last Friday. How many of you were at the football game last Friday? 3, 4, nice and high. 4 of you. Okay, so if I asked the class to tell me what they knew about the football game last Friday, the 4 of you who had your hands up, 5 now because Gage was there, you would be called primary sources because you were there. You lived it. What would you call the rest of us, do you think? Not primary sources. We would be called secondary sources. How many of you were not at the football game, but you know something about it?
I played football.
Okay. Some of us, hands up. We have a few hands up. Okay.
They played football.
Okay. Hands down, please. Matthew, let's be respectful. Let's be respectful. Okay. So we have primary sources and secondary sources. If you are telling the story and you were there, you are a primary source. If you did not go to the football game, but you read about it in the paper. The paper, if the reporter or the journalist was at the football game, they would be a primary source because they were there. You reading their information, if you retell the story, you would be the secondary source. Okay, so as we get talking about history, you guys, this year we're going to cover like 500 years of history, like I said, right? A lot of history. Are most of our sources primary or secondary? I'm hearing secondary. Why, Logan? Why are they secondary? We're covering hundreds of years of history. Why would our sources be secondary sources? I agree with you, but I'm just curious why you think so. Mr. Dahl.
Secondary because they can't live over 100 years.
Right. What kind of sources would we be looking at that are primary sources? Something that could be hundreds and hundreds of years old.
An old man. Music?
Okay, so if there was maybe music that was passed down that was played, possibly, or what? Art that's hundreds of years old, possibly. Cave paintings, if they are original, those would be primary sources. Bones.
Oh, yeah. Fossils.
In fact, I have a really cool story I'm going to tell about bones here in a few weeks. Right, if we are talking about something that tells a story that was there, pottery that was dug up that was there from that time, bones that was there from that time, what kind of sources would those be? Those would be primary because they were there. They would be primary sources. Secondary sources would be sources that were not there. Okay. All right. How do you know if it's a source you can trust or not? Okay. There's many sources that we get from the. In fact, when you do your research project, many of you will go to the internet to get information for your research project. This when I give you your tribe to look up information on. When you go to the internet, how do you know if it's a reliable, trustworthy, credible source?
if it's .com, it was just made by somebody. If it's like something else, it's a little bit more trustworthy.
Okay, we can look at the end .com. There's .com, .edu. Edu means education, so chances are if it's .edu, it might be written by somebody who knows a little bit about education. So it might be more reliable that way. Are all .coms not reliable then?
Yes. No. Some of them.
How do you know?
If it says, actually, I don't know.
Okay, so when we talk about sources, it is hard to tell if your source is reliable or not. Okay, can you trust it or not? Now, just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's necessarily untrustworthy, but we do have to ask ourselves some questions. Number one, who wrote it? Because just knowing who wrote it could tell you, does that person, if you know that person or know a little bit about that organization, is there some bias that you should be aware of? For example, is this person trying to sell you something? If they're trying to sell me something, they want me to believe something so I purchase it, they might be telling me something that's true, or they might be trying to persuade me. Okay, so as a consumer of that information, I'm going to be reading that information. I have to just kind of know, is this source somebody I trust? Somebody I maybe would believe. Okay, there's a lot of information on the internet, and some of the information you look up will be reliable, and some of it will not be reliable. So we're going to have to become good consumers of information. Next, if you're reading an article and it starts getting into a lot of opinion, the author starts saying things, Calvin, please put that away. The author starts saying, I think this happened. I believe this happened next. So they're telling you what they think or believe, and they maybe start, it's very clear that they have an opinion. So now the facts and opinions get a little blurry. Is he telling me what he thinks, or is he telling me what really happened? Okay, so when we're reading, we're going to ask ourselves that a lot. Is this fact or is it opinion? Okay. All right, and we are always going to ask ourselves, is this a primary source? Were they there? Or is it secondary source? Now, here's a quick question. Your textbook is probably something we should trust as a credible source, hopefully, right? The school district bought it, so we're hoping that our school district buys reliable sources. What kind of source is our textbook? Is our textbook secondary or primary?
Secondary.
Let's take a quick vote and see what you think. Our textbook, which we should probably trust, school district bought it, is it a primary source or a secondary source? Who thinks it's primary source? Hands down. Who thinks secondary source? Okay, now we're gonna do that again for the video because we're videoing for a friend of ours who's not here today. So who says it's a primary source? Not sure. A few hands down. How about secondary source? Lots of hands go up, and the majority wins on this one. You guys are right, and we're gonna talk about your textbook. The authors of your textbook, could they actually be there hundreds of years ago? No. But they're going to look for primary sources to combine together to tell us a story, so we can be good thinkers and learn some lessons from our history. Learn the facts about our history, right? Is what we're going to be doing. So what I'd like you guys to do right now, on your desks in front of you, there's a social studies book. You're going to share that social studies book with who's ever sitting in that seat, with also from my class. So the books might move around a little bit. I have to figure out a better place for them to be. But right now, can you open your books to page 8? Okay, please open your textbooks to page 8. Let's see if I can prop this up really nice. Everyone should have a book at their desk. Real quickly. Page 8. I think it's page 8. Yes, 8. What does it say on the top? What does it does it say? Royce.
Analyzing sources.
Analyzing sources. All right, so you follow along with your eyes. I will read for you, and then we will popcorn read after that. Hang on just a second. Let me get another copy. Page 8. I'm going to steal this one. You guys can each have your own. There's plenty. You don't need to share. Page 8. Yep, that way you can have a little distance. You don't need to be breathing on anybody. All right, here we go. Analyzing sources. Okay, quiet mouths, please. All right, I do use the Mrs. Dahl rule. We've talked about this before, right, Augie? You've heard Mrs. Dahl rule when it comes to reading. I will read out loud to start us off, and then I do like to popcorn read, which means you can read if you want to. However, if I see you playing footsie and goofing around and not following along, I will call on you to start reading, and you'll read for a while, whether you want to or not. So if you don't want to be called on to made to read, you'd rather volunteer, then follow along with your eyes, please. Analyzing sources, different sources. You must closely examine a source in order to understand it. We're going to be talking about history. History is told, it's a story. It's a story of what happened. The story that we're going to read depends on who wrote it. All of us are living in this exact day, in this exact classroom, in this exact time, but Augie might go home and tell his family one thing from our day, his story. Calvin might go home and tell a totally different story. Same day, same class, same experiences, different kids, right? History, the stories you read, depends on who wrote them. So we're going to be looking at different sources. Okay. Sources from the past. As you study social studies, you will use sources of information to understand events from the past. By using a variety of sources, you will gain a wide view of historical events. Okay, look at that picture right here. And what kinds of sources do we use to tell the history? Where do you get history for? Kensley? Books. Okay, this is a textbook. This is a good example of lots of compilation of history events and things. Is that it? Just books? That's it?
Yep.
Where else do you read stories of history stories? Isaiah?
Library.
The library? You were just, or you guys have library coming up on Thursday, actually. Stacy first? Computers. Articles on the computer. Did she steal yours? Calvin? The internet? Sure. Facebook?
No.
Twitter? News feeds? Yes, right here.
Sometimes really old movies.
Old movie. Yep, documentaries would maybe nonfiction, but we also get some of our stories probably from fiction stories too, like the legend that I told earlier during the class. There's lessons there that we retell too that have little bits of truth in them. Many times you will come across many sources about the same topic. These sources might have the same information. Sometimes, though, you may find the information differs. If that happens, what should you do? Start by looking closely for opinions. What's an opinion? Barrett.
A thought that you have on something.
Okay. Can you give me a strong opinion you have about something?
I think dogs are better than cats.
All right. Barrett thinks dogs are better than cats.
I don't.
Okay. Now, is that an opinion or a fact? That was a pretty good opinion. I like that, Barrett, because some people will disagree with you. Now, that is your truth. It's true for you that dogs are better than cats, but does that mean dogs are better than cats for everybody?
No.
Nope, so that was a good example of opinion. So start by looking closely for authors to sneak those in. An opinion is a statement that tells you what a person thinks, believes, or feels. The author's opinion may influence his or her interpretation of the events. It is important to separate opinions from facts in order to understand a source. A fact is information that is known to be true. For example, let's go back to Mr. Dahl and Calvin having being students, going home and telling stories. Now, we all know we had a fire drill today, right? Yes, we had a fire drill today. That is fact. We did at 10:40. We had a fire drill. Augie might go home and tell his mom, "Oh, Mom, this was the best day ever."
Please excuse this interruption. Kindergarten, first grade classes with Mr. Dwyer will be, should go to Mrs. Oysted. Mrs. Oysted will be taking Mr. Dwyer's class this afternoon. Thank you.
He might go home, "Mom, it was awesome. We had a fire drill. We got to be outside." Calvin might go home and say, "Oh, Mom, it was the worst day ever. We had to go outside for the fire drill." Now, did both of those have a little bit of fact in them? Yep, but both had a little opinion too. So when we're looking at sources, we're going to look for, is it fact or is it opinion? There might be a little bit of both. Okay. So, and is there a bias? In Augie's example, if he goes home and says, "Mom, it's the best day ever. We went outside," we can tell he likes to be outside. But if Calvin goes home and tells his mom, "Oh, Mom, it's the worst day ever. We had to go outside," what do we know?
Calvin
Doesn't like to go outside. Now, I'm just using those boys for example. These boys both like going outside, so well, that's just an example. When you analyze a source, you also need to think about the author's purpose. Why are they writing or telling the story? Does the author want to inform you of facts? Do they want to persuade you? Think like them, believe like them, or maybe buy something from them? Motivate you? This will change the way the source is written. Okay, credibility, top of the page. I'd love to have a new reader. I've been reading quite enough already today. Augie, go ahead and start. Credibility at top of the page.
When sources disagree about the details of events in history, it can sometimes be hard to decide what to believe. A critical reader must decide on the credibility or correctness of sources.
That just means, hang on just a second, can you trust this article? Is it fact or is it opinion? Are they writing to tell you what happened, or are they writing to tell you so you go do something about it, or you go purchase something from them, or you believe what they believe? Okay, so is it credible? Is it correct? And is it truthful? Are they telling facts, or are they sharing their opinion? And is it biased? Okay, so we're going to have to be thinking, is it a credible source? Okay, popcorn, call someone new, please.
You can judge credibly by asking questions about the source. Is the source and questions about the eyewitness account from someone who was there? Or was it written by someone who didn't see the event? Is the source an historian who knows about the topic?
Read part of a speech given by Patrick Henry in 1775 about British control of the colonies. There is no retreat in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. The war is inevitable. And let it come. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death.
Have you ever heard the quote, "Give me liberty or give me death"? Have you heard that before somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was Patrick Henry who said that. Henry thought that the British were treating the colonists unfairly and that the war was the only option. Henry was an eyewitness to these events leading to the Revolutionary War. This means his speech is credible. It is his opinion, so we have to be aware, what side was this guy on? He thought war was inevitable, so was he probably promoting war at this time? Probably. But he was there, so that makes him a primary source. So his speech would be a primary source in that story. Finding more information. Can I have a new reader, please? Barrett, go ahead. Another.
Another way to check sources' Credibility is by comparing it to other sources to look for more information on the same topic. You can use keywords. Keywords are important words or phrases that are used to describe pieces of information.
So this is kind of interesting. My homeroom was just in library today. You guys have library on Thursday. And do you know that when you want to look for a book in the library, they have you use keywords, right? So let's say if you are really interested in
Mythology.
Oh, say again?
Mythology.
Mythology.
Yes.
Okay, you can type in the word mythology and have a whole bunch of books about mythology pop up. And Miss Donna and Miss Sarah are going to talk about that with you in library when you get to go to the library on Thursday. In articles like this, especially if you're on the internet, you can look for keywords and you can type in a keyword and it will pop up. And that can help you decide if it is credible or not. So you can use keywords about the topic you are studying to search for other sources and compare them. If they're all kind of saying something similar, chances are you got a credible source. But if you have one source that kind of veers off and is totally different, maybe full of opinion, would it be credible?
No.
Probably less credible, not as credible. Be careful to check credibility using internet. Internet is not regulated or controlled, which means that if you read information on the internet, you want to make sure you're on a site that is trustworthy. The author is maybe somebody who is trustworthy, and you want to look for facts
Kim,
and
please.
opinions.
Kimmy.
Oh, thank you. So we will be talking more about sources. Let's just recap real quickly. Somebody tell me about a primary source. What is a primary source? Give me an example of a primary source. Augie?
Somebody who was there to tell the story that they were around when it happened.
Somebody or something that was there. Okay, so that means that it's either something that somebody wrote or told you about from, they were at the event, they were living at that time, or it's something from that time period. So if we're studying hundreds of years of history, we're looking for like pottery or art or bones, arrowheads. Oh, has anyone ever dug up an arrowhead?
I found one.
Okay, those are artifacts. Those would be primary sources if you were studying about that time period. If you found an arrowhead from time period, okay, cool. Hands down. We'll talk more about arrowheads another day. I have a story to share with you. All right, what's an example of a secondary source? Hang on, secondary source. Secondary source, Sophia.
Something or someone that wasn't in that exact data.
Right. So it might be somebody writing about something that happened a long time ago. They may be compiled research. Your textbook is an example of a secondary source because they are compiling lots of information. And were the authors of your textbook actually there?
No.
No. But there are some primary sources in the textbook. We're going to look at pictures of art and bones and some. We're going to read some stories that were from specific time periods. So there are primary sources in this, but your textbook would be considered a secondary source because it's a compilation of a lot of stuff. Okay? All right. So we'll take notes on this tomorrow, but I am happy to have you along on this history ride. We'll be telling the story of the people who lived here hundreds of years ago after we do a little bit of mapping this week first. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording here and we'll catch up with you later on. Okay, so we'll stop the record.